Welcome all, and we're going to start off with city council briefings, and we're going to have a meeting on the presentation on the City of Virginia Beach debt management profile.
Mr. Mayor, before we get going, just to preface this, we started this work with Davenport Consulting over the summer to kind of get a bit of handle of the city's debt picture. And the reason why we brought Davenport aboard was, as you know, we're living in increasingly inflationary times, right? We're seeing cost increases not only for our operation but also for our capital improvement projects. And last year, when the public graciously approved the bond referendum for the flood protection program, one of the conversations that we've always had with council is that on some of our models, it looks like we were tripping one of our self-imposed debt metrics. So we wanted to bring in a third-party analysis on it to get a look at all of that and then come up with a recommendation and kind of give council a general sense of where we are from our debt management capacity and also where we could possibly be with a couple recommended changes from some industry experts. So at this time, I'll hand the floor over to the Davenport company so they can introduce themselves and also talk to you about the presentation on our debt management.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is David Rose, and I'm one of the principals at Davenport. Some of you may recall seeing me last springtime in the older building when we talked a little bit about pensions at your request in one of the work sessions. So I was here then. So appreciate it. My partner of, believe it or not, 20 years, Kyle Laux. I know he doesn't look a day over 25, but I can assure you he is, and especially having to put up with me, it's hard to believe he still looks this young and good. So anyway, I appreciate it. Once again, on behalf of our firm, we very much are thankful to work with the staff here. You've got a tremendous staff, and we see a whole lot of places. That said, we're going to try to be about 20-25 minutes, and then open for Q&A. If there's something that's that pressing, by all means, just stop us. Kyle's going to do the bulk of the presentation, but I'd like to just frame everything, if I could, over the next 4 or 5 minutes. On that first page, introduction, some of you may know Davenport. We actually have offices here in Virginia Beach, but we're headquartered, and I work out of our home in Richmond, Virginia. We are celebrating our 160th year. Very proud of that. And our particular work that we do, as Patrick indicated, is working with local governments. And we actually have had the good fortune of working with Cincinnati, both during the time that Patrick was there, and doing some of the things that we're going to talk about today similarly. Lastly, on that first page, as you can see here, we are going to try to discuss some financing strategies, some observations as it relates to your overall debt, your profile, and your credit ratings. So the purpose of the meeting, as I just started with, is to make sure that we do nothing to harm what is the city's AAA ratings from all the 3 national rating agencies. They're hard-earned. It's not easy to get. And part of the reason you've had those ratings, is you've had financial policies that you've been able to follow for decades. In fact, the policies are effectively 30 years old with a couple of tweaks over the last 10 or 12 years. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is amending those policies to be in sync with the way the rating agencies are moving, have moved, and also where local governments are funded. One of the things that's timely here is that Moody's, one of the 3 major rating agencies, is in the process right now of revising their methodology. And so we, in turn, are looking at City of Virginia Beach to make sure we're in sync with that proposed methodology, which should come out any week now. So lastly, we, of course, know, as Patrick mentioned, you approved what we think perhaps is the largest non-school referendum, may even include schools. We think non-school referendum in the Commonwealth in modern history, that roughly $567 million for flood mitigation. What's interesting about that is that, as Patrick indicated, Costs are up across the board all over the country. So when we work with your staff, we actually put in some additional inflationary factors. No specific number to speak of, but I think the takeaway here for you, and a sneak preview, if you would, of the good news is the following. Number one, even if that inflationary factor carries over to flood mitigation, and we certainly think it will, you have the wherewithal to take care of all your capital needs on all the various different topics that you've identified, your improved CIP, all of those things can be done. And we also believe, having worked for hours with staff on the way they look at things, their conservative nature, their strategic ways, that we can also incorporate some additional capital needs that are not necessarily in your CIP right now over the next several years. So we feel like you're coming at this from a position of strength, but at the same time, we also are going to recommend talking to the rating agencies subsequent to all of this with your blessing to make sure that we are very much in sync with our thinking and some revised policies that keep you on the strength that you have now. So just page 3 there, you can see where you are, the highest category. There is no gradations of AAA, it's just AAA. One of the things that we want to point out is that in the next page, the reasons that you're there, we basically boiled them down to 3 quotes, if you would. These are not our quotes. These are the rating agency quotes. And you can see there, they like your growing the sizable, diverse tax base. They like the fact that you have comprehensive financial policies and conservative budgeting practices. And then finally, they look at your overall fixed costs, which for them includes debt, OPEB, as well as pensions. All of that they call fixed costs, and they view it as manageable by the rating agencies. So again, those are the backbone, if you would, of your AAA. And then being as we are conservative, and that's why we wear those dark suits as finance people, we always look a little bit like undertakers. The bottom line is what could work against those? And you can see here a deterioration of fund balance. If that were to occur, that scares them, and that can very much lead to a downgrade or increase in debt service that's material. Well, frankly, we are talking about a large increase in debt service. However, by working with the staff and getting their feedback, and they're getting our input and some strategies, we think we can handle that material increase in debt burden without having an adverse overall impact. And Kyle's going to show you some of that in a few moments. And then lastly, of course, something that you really have no control over, and that is a significant contraction in the tax base and weakened resident income levels. That's more of a global economic impact. But frankly, as pro-business as Virginia is, as pro-business as Virginia Beach is, we don't see that being likely in the foreseeable future in spite of some of the challenges with regard to inflation, et cetera. Okay, last couple of pages, then we'll turn it over to Kyle to do the bulk of this. One of the things that we did at the request of Letitia and Patrick was to take a holistic view of your capital program and your various funding programs. And you have is essentially 5 of them. 3 of them in that green are tax supported, and we're going to talk about those today. That basically means when you had that referendum approved and you talked about the equivalent pennies that were going to take care of that, so long as you continue to do what you're doing, we see those pennies that you've already done as being ample and sufficient to take care of all those things that are arrows of tax supported. And that includes the flood mitigation program and the inflation that we think is tied to that. Secondly, the self-supporting, we're not going to touch upon that today, but you've got 2 major, we in fact self-supporting by user fees, take care of those. They're both very healthy, they're both sustainable, and as a result, they don't put any burden on the tax-supported program. That's critical. And the way you're set up, the way the staff is set up, there's no reason to believe we're having any problems with that into the foreseeable future. So with that said, the last page here is I'm going to set this up for Kyle. You've got effectively 4, if you would, self-imposed financial policies. You've got any number of others, but this is tied to debt. 4 of them that are tied to debt. As you saw from the presentation, which you've got already, we're going to recommend knocking out that 4th one, a debt per capita. It's no longer relevant to local government analyses, and we can go into that if you like. But suffice it to say, we're actually also going to be talking about strengthening some of those policies. So again, we are in a mode where you meet all of that, but we want to see if we can make it even better and sustainable. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner and appreciate your letting us be here.
All right, well, Mr. Mayor, thank you, sir, Mr. Mayor, and members of council. Nice to see you and be with you. We'll go through the next couple pages here and try and move along relatively quickly. There's a fair amount of information, but obviously we're ready for any questions that you have. So as David mentioned, we've got a variety of those policies. What we're going to do next is kind of talk about where we stand with those right now. So where we start is with our existing tax-supported debt. And again, this is what underpins those AAA general obligation credit ratings. Right now, the city has about $900 million outstanding. You see that on the screen right there. And we point out at the top of the page, you have a payout ratio of about 75%. So what that really means is that you as a city are paying your debts off quickly. You're not pushing it off into future generations. That provides you capacity to take on any of these variety of new projects that you're talking about. And it's viewed very positively by the rating agencies. Again, as David mentioned, both water and sewer and stormwater are fully self-supporting. So it's not a focus of this presentation so long as those continue to be self-supporting. So the next couple pages, we'll take a look at those existing policies. Suffice it to say, as we sit here right now, you are in compliance with all of those existing debt policies. So you start with debt service to general government expenditures, which is basically a measurement of how many dollars out of the budget are going to make a debt service payment expressed on a percentage basis. You have a policy that should be no more than 10%. That's a very responsible policy, commonplace almost in terms of the industry. And what you see in that graph is that you are at about 6% plus. So you've got a nice amount of capacity relative to that policy. And you also are within the AAA range for that particular metric, if you look at the bottom right-hand side of the page. So this is a nice strength of the city and arguably one of the most important policies of all of them. Next page is debt to assessed value. So again, similar kind of visual here. This is measuring the overall amount of that tax-supported debt, that relative $900 million versus the size of your tax base. That again, that tax base being your primary revenue source. You have a policy to be no more than 3.5%. And you see right now, you're just a smidge above 1%. So again, good capacity here. In the next couple pages, we're going to show you what that looks like when we add some new things. But as we sit right now, you're in compliance, you're in good shape. Debt per capita. So David mentioned that as the years have gone by, this is not really looked at by the rating agencies anymore. But even as you look at it as we stand right now, you're in compliance with it. So we're going to recommend that we move away from this policy for a variety of reasons that we'll explain. But as we sit here right now, you are in compliance with the policy. Last existing policy, debt to per capita income, similar to debt per capita in that it's an older policy that just isn't viewed as much by the rating agencies, at least in current times. So we're going to recommend moving away from this. But same as debt per capita, we're in compliance with the policy as we sit right now. So the next couple pages, those are our existing policies. I want to give you a snapshot of not just how does a city stand relative to our own policies, but how do you stand relative to other AAAs, both nationally and both in the state. As the rating agencies are doing their assessments and reviewing and affirming your AAAs, one of the things they're going to do is not just look at you, but look at how you compare to other AAAs across the country. So what this will show in the next couple of pages is a few comparatives. We, meaning Virginia Beach, are at the top there in that kind of gold bar, about 1.4%. And this is debt to assessed value. And what you'll see is we've compared you to national AAA cities that are AAA by Moody's. We've looked at the larger cities over 300,000 and trying to do an apples to apples comparison. We've looked at Virginia AAA counties. We obviously know Virginia Beach is indeed a city, but you have a lot of the characteristics of the counties. And so we've got a variety of AAA counties across the state. We said, hey, let's see what we look like compared to them. And then lastly, that bottom green bar there, how do we look relative to other AAAs in Virginia? And so you'll see that same theme here in the next couple pages. But as you look at debt versus assessed value, we're very much in line with all three of those, both national and across the state in terms of other AAAs. Debt service to expenditures, again, how many pennies out of every dollar in the budget are going to make a debt service payment? We stand right now at about 6.3%. What you see there is that national AAA cities are even upwards of 12%. We're not recommending you go that high, but on a comparative basis, you're very strong relative to those other national AAA cities. AAA counties in and around 8%, other Virginia AAA cities at about 9%. So amongst all those comparatives of other AAAs, you're actually better than each and every one of them. So next slide here, unassigned fund balance is a percent of revenue. And so this, you may say, why is this in here in the middle of a discussion about debt? And the reason is, as the rating agencies are coming up with their credit ratings, they're looking at a variety of different factors. We're talking about today is very much debt and capital focused, but arguably the most important financial factor that those rating agencies and credit markets are looking at are what are our reserve levels and what are our fund balances. So we wanted to put this in here as a little bit of perspective. The next couple pages, we'll start to think about what we look like in the future, taking into account flood, taking into account the CIP, and how we think about those policies. But one very important way that we think about maximizing and maintaining our AAA is not just on the debt side, but making sure we've got a very strong fund balance. And so we want to let you see that and see how you stack up relative to other AAAs. So if you're in and around 13%, as we understand, these are unaudited numbers for 2022, so very fresh, recent numbers. That's up from the last couple of years. What you see on a comparative basis is that the national AAA cities are about 16, Virginia AAA counties about 11, Virginia AAA cities about 17. So if you're in that 13% range, you're very much in the range of those other AAA cities. So the next couple pages, we'll talk about now what do we look like going forward. Hopefully a little bit of background there in terms of where we stand with the existing side. What do things look like on an estimated basis with your capital program as you've identified it and we've worked with your staff? So you have basically three components to the tax-supported borrowing program. They total about $1.75 billion right now. So it's over a 10-year time period. We compared that to what you've done historically. So last 10 years, you've done about $800 million in terms of tax-supported borrowing. And so what you're looking at going forward is about double what you've done the last 10 years. So again, to the city manager's comments, I think part of what we're thinking about here is how do we make sure we do everything we can to keep those AAA ratings, keep our financial strength, knowing that we're going to be taking on what looks about double the amount that we've done the last 10 years. You see the bottom of the page there, the tax-supported components there, charter bonds, public facility revenue bonds, and the flood mitigation referendum is factored into that $1.7 billion as well. So it's intended to be all-encompassing. But again, what we know is that we'll have to time and think about how do we time the borrowings, how do we structure those borrowings, knowing that we're doing what is arguably double what we've done the last 10 years, and making sure we keep within those AAA ratios. This page will give just a little bit of a sense here and talk specifically about the flood mitigation funding strategy. We've spent a bunch of time on this. It's obviously a very, very large investment by the city. a historic investment by the city. And so what we've spent a bunch of time is to really look at and understand not just what are the dollars involved, but when do we think those dollars are needed? And that's not necessarily us at Davenport coming up with that. That's working very closely with your staff, with some outside engineers from Jacobs, who are very well respected nationally. And what we've come up with collectively is what you see in the middle graph there. And that basically takes care of the entire $567 million. But to the prior comments about inflation, we've also factored in, for planning purposes, about a 30% contingency on top of that. We don't know if that's the exact number, but it stands to reason, the way the world is working, that we need to be planning for things coming in more expensive than we had thought maybe 1 or 2 years ago. So we've factored that all in. And to David's comments earlier, as we look at this plan right now, even with that 30% inflationary factor factored in, you still have sufficient cash flows to make sure that all works. So one of the ways that we think about doing that at the bottom of the page is to potentially put in place what's called an interim financing tool. And we'll likely be back to you to talk in more detail about that, but just a way to make sure that we aren't borrowing dollars prematurely and we're able to tailor and align the dollars that we actually borrow with the timing of the actual spending on those projects. So just a couple more maybe commentary bullet points. Again, we know about inflation. It's all over the news right now. It will likely be with us within the local government world for the foreseeable future. We're not professional economists in that sense, but we want to be planning and thinking that way to make sure we have that contingency. So as we move on, thinking with all of that as background, the city's debt policies, David had mentioned it's been about 30 years or thereabouts since they were implemented. What ways can we enhance those? What ways can we kind of bring those forward, given the way the world works now and given our current situation in Virginia Beach? We know in the second bullet point here, they continue to focus on debt versus assessed value and debt for service versus expenditures. You have those two policies already. We'll recommend that you keep those. We've mentioned debt per capita, debt to income, just not used in terms of the rating agencies anymore. Recommend putting those to the side and not using them. But fourth bullet point, what the rating agencies are focusing more on is this concept of total liabilities and your total fixed costs. And again, what that really means is what is our debt, but also what are our pensions and our OPEB, or kind of our other post-employment benefit liabilities, and how do those all look when we wrap them all together? And so we'll show you what that looks like and a potential policy related to it. So page 10, just encapsulated here, maybe in a single table, are some of those proposals and recommendations in terms of the policies. And again, to echo what David mentioned at the beginning, our recommendation to you now is we'll talk through these, but really want to get feedback and take it to the rating agencies before anything would be adopted, likely in the next calendar year. So you see the recommendations there. In terms of the table, debt versus assessed value, top of the page, we actually think we can bring that down a little bit. Your tax base has grown so much, going from 3.5 to 3 still gives you sufficient capacity. Debt service to expenditures is a solid level, not recommending for the moment we change that. And then you see the fixed costs and the payout ratio is a fourth policy that we would recommend implementing. And that gets back to that page where we talked about how quickly we pay the debt down, making sure we're not pushing things into future generations. That payout ratio is the policy and the measurement that kind of serves as the guide as to how quickly we pay the debt down. So next couple pages, we'll look at what those policies, again, the new proposed policies look like when we factor in what you've identified in terms of the CIP. So it's the charter bonds, the public facility revenue bonds, it's the flood mitigation, all those various things. When we layer that in, as you saw a couple pages ago, what do each and every one of those ratios look like on an estimated basis? So this page, debt service to expenditures, we have a lot of colors here, so hopefully those are coming through on the screen. But long story short, if we've got our 10% policy in that red line, even after we factor everything in, using some estimated interest rates and borrowing the dollars, as you saw a couple pages ago, we still keep ourselves as a city below 8%. And that 8% level, again, is that AAA level. And a lot of that goes to the timing and how we bring that debt on to make sure that we're matching what is borrowed with when it's actually needed from a cash flow basis. Next slide here, debt to assessed value, similar picture. This is the policy where we think we can go from about 3.5 to 3. So you see that red line kind of move down there with the arrows. Again, even as the flood, the charter bonds, public facility revenue bonds, even as that's layered on, we still end up in and around about 2% relative to a 3% policy. So still keeping yourself within a good, responsible, arguably AAA level for a Virginia local government. This page here, that fixed cost ratio. So what this ratio is doing is taking not just the debt service, but what are our payments on our pensions, on our OPEB, and how do those, and we wrap that all together holistically, how do those factor in? So here, the thought is a 20% policy. Anything under 20% is viewed as pretty solid. Anything getting to 25% is kind of a red flag area. You see, as we do some projections out, you end up below 15% over that time period. And lastly, that 10-year payout ratio. So again, making sure we're not pushing things too far into the future. The city's done a good job historically in terms of when it issues debt, of paying that debt down responsibly. And what this graph is basically showing is if we were to put in place a policy to say we're going to pay off at least 50% of our principal over the next 10 years. That's what that payout ratio means, how much principal of the debt in the aggregate is paid off over the next decade. Make sure it's at least 50% paid off. You would be at around 70%. As some of the flood mitigation things come on, that dips down into the 60% range. But again, solid capacity relative to that ratio, not pushing things off into the future, and balancing that in a responsible way. So in terms of concluding observations, and then I'll turn it back to David here just in a couple pages. Again, with some of these updated policies, you'd have the capacity to take on what you've identified in terms of the CIP. As we've run some numbers, we think there's in the range of about $250 million of even additional capacity, not to say exactly what that goes towards, but within those ratios, something in that range is possible over a multiple time period, meaning it's not all at once, but over multiple years, maybe 5 to 10 years. In terms of the debt affordability side of things, so that's the cash flow side, the budget side, you need to watch that very, very closely. Your budget staff does an excellent job there, and so we think that for the moment is in the affordable range. Flood mitigation, well, that's going to be a monumental and historic process. And so just keeping an eye on that, being flexible and able to evaluate the costs as they come in. On the next page here, we know that, again, as the rating agencies are updating their policies, thinking about proactively going and talking to them, showing them some of this planning, showing them some of the proposed policies, and getting their feedback. And last couple bullet points there in terms of, again, knowing that what you're taking on going forward is a multiple of what you've done historically, putting in place some new tools to make sure that can be managed responsibly over that time period. So with that, I will turn it to David here in terms of next steps.
Okay. Thank you, Kyle. So this is our last page, and then we'd be delighted to answer any questions or clarify anything that we've talked about. But just as a roadmap, if you would, with your blessing, we're here today. Of course, it's October 11th, and we're providing this briefing after working closely, as we said, with your staff. And here we are with the hopes that perhaps as you start to take this, digest this, give us all some feedback over the next month or two. What we'd like to shoot for is a meeting sometime in December with the national credit rating agencies to talk about some of your feedback, some of your thoughts, and some of our ideas collectively with staff on these policies and some of the changes. The thinking then is they will not be overly prescriptive, but they'll give us some sense of things. And if we get all of that, we'd like to come back to council probably in January, I should say, brief you on our meetings, also look to some additional guidance from you, and then collaborate so that as we move forward towards your 24 fiscal year budget work, we could perhaps have in place by maybe the March timeframe, we could have some new policies in place, and we can in effect have for you your indications of how you feel and a roadmap from us as to the next series of borrowings, when, and exactly the strategies for those. With that, again, we appreciate it. Thank your staff; they're terrific, and your leadership is second to none. So, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Rosemary.
Thank you for this great presentation. And of course, Davenport is a well-respected organization in our state, and
Thank you.
there's a lot of credibility, I think, as well. So we have a policy between 8 and 12% for our fund balance. Do you still think that's a good, safe place to be, or I heard the number 13%?
I think realistically, it works for you. At the same time, it is on the low end relative to AAAs. And I think that's one of the discussions that we're going to try to have with the rating folks. One of the things that you've done a very good job of, I say you meaning staff, council, the city itself, you have a lot of different pockets of money that you've been conservative, as the rating agencies pointed out. We may want to think about maybe recategorizing some of that so it gets counted towards the unassigned and makes that, if you want to call it that number, bigger. Not that we necessarily have to put aside more dollars, but maybe we can move some dollars around. And again, that's really part of the realistic discussion we want to have with them. As Kyle may have pointed out, we try to point this out, for the rating agencies, for ratings, whether we like it or not, the single most important factor, it seems to us these days, is your unassigned fund balance. They just look at cash as being king. And so from that perspective, we just have to be realistic about it. So I'll hold off my commentary beyond that just to say, and maybe Patrick, I think you wanted to say something.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, to add to what the question the Vice Mayor had, and to add to what David said as well, I don't necessarily think it's a cause for concern. It's one of the things that really surprised me about Virginia Beach when I first became city manager here, is that when you look at the initial profile in the balance sheet of Virginia Beach, you look at the fund balance and you see the 8 to 12%, but then you look at all the different funds that council has, open space funds, TIP funds, and stuff like that, that are set by council policy to be used for a specific thing. If there's ever a time where we needed to pool resources, it's up to a majority of council to move those resources. So there's ways to explain out, and that's what we hope when we get to the rating agency, we can explain that although it may look like this, there is a ton of flexibility should the majority of council decide they want to move in a different direction to take care of something historic, like for example, when council reappropriated and moved a lot of funds around to take care of stormwater after Hurricane Matthew. The flexibility lies within this body, and this body usually shows that when it matters, they rise to the occasion to take care of the main thing.
Anybody else? John?
I want page 15, if I could. Traditionally, we have used our fund balance to pay cash, and then we've issued debt to reimburse that balance. Did I hear an indication that maybe the cash demand for the flood projects was going to require a different approach than that? It wasn't explicitly stated, but it was the inference that I got, that we wouldn't be able to use that mechanism for the volume of the flood projects.
So I would say this. Number one, the practice that you've used is a good practice. We like that practice. That's number one. I think number two, to Patrick's point, If indeed they view cash as king, and you're talking about now an unprecedented new program, was what the 567 plus the inflation that Kyle pointed out, we may want to think a little bit of massaging that and doing a little bit of creativity with, again, maybe some fronting of funds, maybe on an interim basis. We're not there yet. It's premature. So again, we haven't made that final decision as a body, but you'll certainly know it and the rationale. But again, you're right. I think ultimately, not in the early years per se, but ultimately just the sheer magnitude of that program may strip out the cash that you have to such a point that may be a little bit better to use a combination of the way you do things and maybe some new thinking. So we're evolving on that, Councilman.
That was my deduction, but I wanted to make sure that's what was meant by the inference of interim.
Sure.
It wasn't clear, because you said note 3% assumptions, but you didn't make any real conclusion or analytical assessment of what you thought interest rates were going to be, or 10-year treasury notes, which is what we generally are an index to, the 10-year specifically, more likely than the 20. So what is the interest rate, which is a key part of debt service? Did you use 3%?
No, so we actually used 5% interest rates to just go and look at the overall program. Is that scientific? No, it's not. But at the same time, you think about it, a year ago, we're flirting with 2% long-term rates. Now, basically, if we were to go to the marketplace today, so to speak, on a 20-year borrowing, probably is going to be below 4%, all in fixed rate. So we put in a cushion to that. But at the same time, I've been doing this for 40 plus years, that cushion may not be sufficient, but at least we're hopeful that if you average it and blend it, it should suffice for a while.
If that's the report, I'm sorry that I missed it.
What's that?
If the 5% number was in the report, I'm sorry that I missed
It
it.
may not be. We've had a lot of
We've had a lot of
drafts.
I think that's
So.
plenty for how far you can see out in the future is about 5 years at best. So
Right.
I think that's a really good job. The other thing, since the profile is looking out in the years when you're talking to rating, we have a phase 2 and a phase 3 flood program. And I don't know that if that was baked in when you were looking, because that's not part of our approved CIP, and we haven't actually programmed that. But that's probably about another $1 billion to $1.5 billion. Was that part of your profile?
So yes and no. The reason we show you this going out to 2045, which will probably be a little past my retirement date, I just want to put that for record, okay, is because when you look at it here, you notice, as Kyle said, the good news, we never broached that 8%, which is considered AAA by the rating agencies. However, it starts to go down considerably because we know what you just said. There's going to be that next layer of $1 billion plus. So I think the point here, suffice it to say, is this. If we can, let me just show this, see if I don't know if this works, but it does?
Something showed.
Okay, so I guess the idea is, oh, there it is, okay. Oh, won't work on the screen, okay. So here's the point, if you look at the next decade or so, next 10 years, as Kyle said, we're gonna do about $1.75 billion. So what you can almost think about is if you hit that high water mark at about 2031, 2032, and you just basically just superimpose another $1.75 billion, we probably are going to be a commensurate with about that 7.5%. So we feel good that that next phase of needs, starting a decade from now, can be incorporated if we have reasonable growth. Now, I will say, we assumed an average 3% growth. You look at the last 10 years, it's been greater than that. Okay, but who knows what really happens? So the answer is yes. That's why we have that payout ratio that we're introducing with y'all's recommendation and agreement, because if we can have a solid 50% payout ratio, and you notice we never got below 60%, that's really what we'd like to do, an unofficial, not broach 60%, then we're in that mode here to put in probably another couple $2 billion plus for the city. So what I think the point here is for everyone out there in the audience, we are not turning around and sacrificing the future citizens for today's citizenry. We're basically trying to get a nice blend and a mix of what's being done today responsibly and what will need to be done long after maybe I'm here, but that type of thing.
If I follow that thought, then really there's a dash line below 8 that's probably 7, because if the AAA bond rating is less than 8,
Right.
you don't want to run on the 8 line like the car, it's the red line, so you hit yellow at 7. So you
In that
so you
particular
have margin.
metric. So to give you,
7% is really the effective.
for you, it happens to be. I think the point here, Councilman, is for you. However, there are some very strong cities and counties per se, for example, that are AAA, have been AAA for the period of time that you have. And in their case, I've seen them broach that for a couple of years, knowingly going into that. And I mean broach the 10% levels because they just happen to have, let's say, a very big capital program, but they demonstrated they were able to accommodate all that. One example is Chesterfield County around the Richmond area, very highly rated, very well run. Today, they're now back in your level in the 7 and 8s, but at one time they had up nearly 12% when they had to do a lot of capital. So for us, it's a matter of sustainability, and we think you look good, but 7% is probably going to be in that range.
I remember, I think I shared with you back in the days of Giles Dodd, for the people remember. I know that Barbara remembers Giles. We were AA, but our interest in bonds sold as if they were AAA because of our reserve. That was really what got us to AAA rate, even though we were AA bonded. I do appreciate it. I have other questions, but I don't want to use them today. This was worth studying. I just want to make sure the public knows that we have the capacity to do phase 2 and phase 3, because I don't know about the rest of you, but I do get asked about when does phase 2 projects get started. So it's nice to know that when we retire the debt, we can recycle it and we can get those projects done. Thank you very much.
Anybody else?
Well, I'm just glad we're updating our policies. I commend the manager for taking the initiative. Thank you very much.
Vice Mayor, just to get some clarity on it. So the recommendation for next steps is that Davenport and staff meet with the rating agencies, and then after that, we digest what they suggest to us and bring that back to council for further consideration. It's okay for staff to move in that direction? Yes.
Great job. Thank you so much for coming, from leaving Richmond and coming and spending your time with us today.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so we have the next thing on the agenda is the Community Development Corporation.
The NAMI.
NAMI.
All righty, we ready for the next one?
All right, so Mr. Mayor, members of council, at this time, Kathy Warren, Deputy Director for Economic Development, will brief council on the VBCDC NAMI potential site location. So if you remember, council, I think back in spring of 2022, we received an unsolicited proposal or a proposal from VBCDC NAMI requesting a partnership and support to come together and identify a couple locations for future development. Staff, at your request, met and worked with the team on the project requirements, and then we have identified 2 locations. We're bringing those 2 locations here to brief council to determine what next steps council wants us to move with. And at this time, Kathy Warren will take over and present from here.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, Mr. Manager. We'll go ahead and dive right in. So to provide some background on this proposal today, the Virginia Beach Community Development Corporation, or VBCDC, and the National Alliance for Mental Illness, or NAMI, they're both interested in partnering to develop an affordable housing community that also provides services for those living with mental illness. In the fall of 2021, VBCDC and NAMI approached the City of Virginia Beach requesting assistance to identify alternative potential sites for this project. They were working on another site elsewhere that had nothing to do with the city, but that site ended up falling through. This proposal was then presented to the council in closed session on February 8th of 2022, and council provided direction to the staff to conduct research and try to identify any other sites that could meet the criteria for this proposal. Staff identified 2 potential sites, one of which VBCDC and NAMI prefer, and we'll show you both of those sites today. So what we will be asking at the end of this presentation is for direction on next steps. We'd like council to discuss the preferred site. If desired, when should public engagement begin for the surrounding community of that site? And then if desired, should VBCDC and NAMI take the next steps to apply for funding in the March 2024 round through Virginia Housing, and at which time they would have to provide direction on site control, planning, and rezoning. So VBCDC proposes to develop a mixed-income, mixed-use affordable housing project in collaboration with NAMI of Coastal Virginia, a nonprofit organization who provides free services and programs for persons living with mental illness. VBCDC will own and provide management and maintenance services, and NAMI will be the anchor lessee of the office space. Approximately 10 to 15% of the units would be reserved for low-income persons with mental illness, and the remaining units are anticipated for households earning up to 80% of the area median income. The project would include 40 to 60 affordable mixed-income rental units, 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units, and office space for NAMI's regional headquarters. So just to give you an idea of the 10 to 15%, if they did develop 60 affordable units here, 9 of those would be reserved for persons living with mental illness. So site criteria, this was defined as a 1.5 to 5 acre site that could develop a mixed-use project with up to 60 units, zone B4 or compatible to rezone to B4 for mixed use. Remember, again, it's not just housing here, it's this office space that would take it to a mixed-use zoning. Located out of the above 75 noise zone in the AQs, needs to be consistent with policies of the comprehensive plan, located near or on a transit route for the residents, and then close to amenities and medical facilities. So the 2 sites that staff has identified, one on Burton Station Road, that's a 3-acre site, and then one at the corner of Nimmo Parkway and Princess Anne, a 3.5-acre site. The first, Burton Station Road, this is a 3-acre site, meets the intent of the Burton Station SGA for mixed use. It's a 1/4 mile from the transit line. It's zoned R5D currently, and staff may be supportive of B4, and it's walking distance to amenities. Current assessed value is $176,200. It's just an aerial view of the site, and then the SGA map. It's hard to see on this, but there's a yellow asterisk here for the location of the site. For the site at Nimmo Parkway and Princess Anne Road, this is a 3.5-acre site. It's within the Princess Anne County Courthouse Historic and Cultural District and Courthouse Corner Suburban Focus Area. Zoned Ag 2, located adjacent to A18 zoning district. It's a 1/4 mile from transit line, amenities, and medical facilities, and vehicular access must be from the rear of the property with connection to Nimmo Parkway. The assessed value here is $161,500. This potential site, in the comprehensive plan, there's a recommendation, and this is the 2016 comprehensive plan, Suburban Focus Area 2.2, recommends uses that include low-rise, low-intensity office and service uses that are attractively designed with reverse frontage access, residential dwellings mixed with such uses is appropriate. And then this just shows another aerial view showing that it's out of the ACUS zone. It's located right there at the corner of Nimmo and Princess Anne. So as we asked in the very beginning of the presentation, we are looking for direction today. The Nimmo Parkway and Princess Anne site is the preferred site of VBCDC and NAMI. We do request direction on if it is desired to move forward with the site, at what point should public engagement begin with the surrounding communities, and then if desired, should VBCDC and NAMI take next steps to apply for funding in the March 2024 round with Virginia Housing. And with that,
Okay, we're gonna go with, Ms. Miles first. Y'all seen her, and then Barbara, and then,
Thank you for the presentation. Are both sites city-owned?
yes, ma'am, both sites are city-owned.
Okay. Can you tell me why this was preferred versus the one in Bayside? Not gonna be in territorial.
I believe part of this was it checked more boxes for them. So this was closer to medical facilities, for instance.
And this, just to be clear, the residents, it would be mixed income. It's not all. I just want the public to be clear that only about 10% would be designated for those with, those with mental illness challenges.
So that would be 10 to 15% would be reserved for the mental illness, but the rest would be affordable units.
Okay, I just want that to be clear for the public.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
okay, Barbara, then Rosemary.
Well, first of all, I want to say I absolutely do support the project. And I certainly don't want my comments to be taken that I'm not in support of the work that this would achieve. But I have to disagree that this site meets those criteria. And I can appreciate the fact that perhaps some of the folks now just don't remember all that has gone into the background with this specific site and with that corridor. I don't know if you want me to go into that background now, but I do have it here. This certainly is not zoned B2 or compatible to be rezoned to B4, to B4, or compatible to be rezoned to B4. I don't know of any B4 anywhere close to this, and it's not adjacent to A18. That's across the road, and that had been a commercial site, and I really didn't think that was appropriate. But there are, and as far as not being within, less than 75 decibels, but this is in this site here that's in the ACUS, because you have to remember that this is the flyway between Oceana and Fentress. And yes, there is this little place in the middle called the Catcher's Mitt that is out of this ACUS, but it's just barely on the other side of the line. You couldn't get much closer and not be in it. And in this, what it says here on this ACUS map here, which is what I think we've been going by with Oceana, is that density must be similar to surrounding property and conform to the comprehensive plan, including area plans and guidelines. And all of the surrounding property on that side of Princess Anne Road from Tidewater down is all single family. And we had extensive work with that community, particularly the Christopher Farms community, when we were doing this document, which is the Princess Anne Corridor Study. We began this document when we started to widen that road, because it had been the 5-mile stretch and 2 lanes for so many years. But when the corridor study, when the road widening project was first developed, this study began, and that was about 2000. But this all had to be amended in 2005 with the BRAC, when, of course, the Navy became very much concerned because Fentress turned out to be the outlying field, And that flyway between Oceana and Fentress is extremely important because of the noise that's caused there, particularly at night. And there were a lot of compromises, but they came up with the ITA, which just happens to be on just the other side of Princess Anne Road from this side, the ITA, which says no more residential in that area. But the residential above that on this side of Princess Anne Road has a lot of things that it has to go through to be determined that it is this conforming to the property around it. And as I said, yes, this is on just the other side of that line, but you know, noise has spillover effects. It doesn't stop at a line, and particularly at night when the jets are flying. I think the concern for Oceana in this ITA is that we don't put people in that area or don't have a use in there where people spend the night, where they sleep. And B4, if we are of all the city, we're going to pick a spot that has noise problems, I don't think that's something that we should do. But in doing this corridor study, then we went on again, it was amended later in 2009 to change the name of Judicial Parkway to Nemo Parkway and some other things. But then it was after that time that we came up with how would we develop some of the open spaces that are on the east side, I guess it is, of Princess Anne Road. And there was a lot of discussion for years about how what was called Sub-Area 2 would develop. And that is under construction now. That's the Princess Anne Meadows. But then this particular little site, I think you've got a picture in there, is called Sub-Area 3. If you can get it to that picture that shows how you would develop this. Okay, and it's very specific. And it mentions that there are, well, at that time there were 7 sites. I believe this site that you're talking about now, the city acquired with the road project, that's 7 sites, but they should be consolidated with one use and very specific. But it also says that in this area, it should be low-intensity office and service uses. And of course, the reverse frontage has to be because Princess Anne Road is a no-access road. Now, the only thing that's in those lots right now is what was the post office, and now I think Cox uses it, but that's similar to what they agreed would be, because everything behind that is Christopher Farms. Christopher Farms from Princess Anne Road over to Holland Road. It's a very large neighborhood, and we worked extensively with Christopher Farms to come up with these recommendations. Now, just behind this lot that you have chosen is a lot of open space from Princess Anne Road to Holland, and that is Sub-Area 4. And as a baseline, it's very specific that says the residential with overall maximum density at 2 single-family dwelling units per acre. 2 per acre, single family. But these front ones, they did say could be office. But if you do an incentive development, you could get where it says residential with overall maximum density at 3.3 single-family dwelling units acre within the greater than 65, because that noise zone there level is 65 to 70, and 4 units to the acre within the less than 65 noise per zone. So they could get up to 4 units in this area that's just adjacent to the 65. But that is very specific in this, and this is what was lifted and put into the current comprehensive plan. So I just don't know how you can say that going to B4 is consistent with the comprehensive plan policies, which are lifted right from this Princess Anne corridor study and says just what I just read to you. As I said, we worked extensively with all of the neighborhoods, single-family neighborhoods in this area, literally for years, particularly Christopher Farms, to come up with these recommendations. And it's, like I said, it's in our current comprehensive plan. And I cannot go to those people and say that we're considering B4. It certainly seems disingenuous to all that we promised them and have promised them. But if that's, what you suggest, then that unfortunately is what we'll have to do. But, I think the thing that is not good is that in looking for this site, we restricted it to properties that the city owns. I'm assuming because the thought was that we would donate the property. Maybe the city doesn't already own a site that is right for this project. I would have no objection, and I think we should look for sites that are in areas that meet the right criteria. And we certainly do have precedents for the city assisting to purchase a property that would be needed, and I would certainly support that. But this particular site just goes against all of this that was developed with a lot of work with this community, and I appreciate that maybe the folks who reviewed this weren't aware of all of this background, but I could give you a lot more, but I guess it's time to stop.
Okay, Rosemary?
So this is so close to the historic district. Will all those buildings have to go by the historic guidelines that, like our courthouses, and I know there's additional costs to building things to look like we look. Are they willing to do everything it takes to have those standards?
So they would have to abide by that, but we just aren't at that stage yet. We're really just trying to identify, is this a site that we want to go to the next step of research with?
I think that would be important to know because it's probably going to be an additional cost in their building plan.
Okay, John?
No, I'll yield this to
Just
Lisa
one more
District.
thought that I hadn't, because it's in one of these maps very plainly, that this area also has wetlands, and 2 or 3 people, when I have mentioned this to them, that's the first thing they said was, you've got wetlands on that site. And it shows on one of these lots right here, one of these maps that I can show you. And so I don't think maybe you went as far as looking whether or not there's wetlands, but I'm told that it's a wet site.
Okay, John?
Here it is, right here. There are
And
the
then
lights.
Michael.
I just want to revisit how we got here. I think we got to looking at city sites, a good question for the vice mayor, because we had looked at private sites and nothing was available. I mean, I'm not, obviously, if price was no limit, there's always something available. But within the realm of our capacity and the nonprofit capacity, if I remember correctly, we got to here because we did the private sector search. I think you briefed that, I remember.
That's right.
So that's what, it comes down to. And I'm not saying that we worked really hard and the staff did. I've looked at, we have a requirement for people who have a need, mental health services, and this doesn't come close to meeting it. Burton Station, that's one, and these are questions that came up. We put a lot of stuff in Burton Station. We have. Some people say, well, in that village concept, all the stuff we've put there so far has been of one kind of product. And we've gotten some feedback as, well, where's the other part of our village? So I feel like there's a place we go to put everything that no one else wants. They didn't say it like that, but I think that's what they meant. Because there's always a controversy when you talk about mental health, I'm sure, but you always get pushback. But because people have their own stereotypes of what they think we're trying to do. But I think this is a good site relative to no site. Someone says, oh, well, can we go buy property? Well, if you're willing to pony up enough money, I'm sure. But then I think we have to make a commitment that we're going to tell the manager that there's real money, or otherwise it's just, going out looking, it's like when you're a kid looking at the Christmas catalog, you're cutting out stuff you want to get. But in the end, there's no money to buy it. So it's kind of a frustrating experience for staff to go and look. So I think unless we're willing to actually say, here's what we're going to put forward as cash to go buy property, we're either Burton Station or here. to service this need that the community, no one's doubting the need. I appreciate Mrs. Henley acknowledging and supporting that we have a need for this population. We have a need for affordable housing and for mental health services. So if not here, which meets the medical needs, then we're at Burton Station. Or if we're really serious, we want to go there, then the third option, which I realize why you didn't make that option here, Patrick would look for us, is that we are seriously going to say, here's a source of revenue to materially go out and secure a site. We were trying to look at, given all the competition for finances, I know the mayor's well aware of, is there a city site? Is it the best site in all possible worlds you could put one? No. Is it the best site of the two per the servicing organizations? Yes. Here's a timeline. I can't judge for Wood or Rocky to say, hey, we should put it here, but I wouldn't be bringing this for the group as a recommendation if I didn't think for the servicing population, it's the best place relative to of all the non-choices. And that's really what this is about. This isn't about, is this the ideal location? No. But of the locations available to us with no appropriation of cash to go hunt for a site, this is the best site. And so I think a good direction is, do we want to embrace this site? I hope that we do, but if we don't, that the people around the table are committed then to appropriating dollars so that the manager now can meaningfully go find a better site at commercial rates, knowing that we would have to donate that property to, because the providers, because we'll never, if you've seen it, you're not going to be building affordable housing. I've said this many times, unless you bring money to the table. You can't get it because of the land. So either we go here or we got to open up our wallet somehow and find the dollars to buy a site at a better location. That's where I think we are.
Okay, Michael.
Well, I think Councilmember Moss summarized it very well. I just want to take a chance to recognize the folks from NAMI and PBCC who are here, and also to recognize really the wonderful staff work that Kathy Warren and Ruth Hill and the city manager invested into this project. And, it's a very important effort. I don't think anyone doubts that the need is strong and it very much exists here, both for affordable housing, we talk about that all the time, and also for mental health services and for permanent supportive housing for people who live with mental illness. And I just want to make sure that we all understand, and that I understand correctly, Ms. Warren, you didn't just survey sites that the city owned, you surveyed all of the, commercial property that was on the market.
That's correct.
That's correct. So this is the preferred site from both what's available in the city inventory as well for what's available on the private marketplace. And I think that's really strikes to the point that Mr. Moss raised, which is if not, we have a need, and we all agree on that. And if not, the perfect site doesn't exist. So if not here, then where? And we need to do it now. We're well behind where we should be in providing these types of services. And I think it's really important that we move forward. And also, the decision point we have here is we're not making a decision on whether or not to rezone this particular parcel. It's whether to, I just want to make sure everyone understands that, is whether to continue to explore this as an option, including with community engagement, including with further due diligence around compatibility with the comprehensive plan and some of the issues that Mrs. Henley raised. And I have very much confidence that Ms. Warren and Ms. Hill wouldn't have brought this to us if it was incompatible with existing city planning documents. So, the line is the line. It may be just across the street, but that's the line. And we have a need that's so great here that I think it warrants exploring whether we could go right up to that line. And that's how important I believe these issues are for our city. And that's, I think, what we're being asked to move forward with here today. So thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Well, somebody's going to have to sit down with all these documents with me and show me how this complies with the comprehensive plan, because unfortunately, I guess I've been misunderstanding all these years when we went to a neighborhood and told them this is what it will be. And then we suddenly say, but that doesn't count anymore. So if that's your wish, I mean, I've alerted some folks to Christopher Farms to make sure they were watching this presentation today, and they certainly will be letting you hear from them. But I think at the very least, you need to check this as far as the wetlands, because this particular map right here in the courthouse, I mean, in the Princess Anne Corner study, shows a big green spot there of emergent, seasonal emerged wetlands. And I know that there are a lot of wetlands in this area, that if you're going to develop to B4, I think you're going to have some major problems. B4 is a very intense zoning category. And I think we also have a lot of issues in this area with getting the public water. I think we just saddled a development with an awful lot of expense to develop something that would take the public water out of this area. So I would hope that we would be looking at those kinds of things, plus it's a question of the additional cost of being in the historic district. But again, just the trust factor with our neighborhoods and our planning documents doesn't look to be very great when this is the way we interpret something that's written as plainly as these statements are for these specific properties. And I think the public's going to lose faith in our documents, because I certainly am.
Linwood.
Well, if the next step is public engagement, could we do public engagement on both sites? In the event that one of the sites, we get a lot of pushback on one, I'd like to have something moving forward on this and not put all our eggs in one basket and find out that, we get a lot of pushback from the public and we have to start all over again somewhere else. Is that possible?
Well, I think we'd have to consult with our partners from VVCDC and NAMI, because my recollection of their their feelings about this site was that they felt very strongly that this was the preferred site, and that they, from what I recall, and they're in the room, so we could ask them, but maybe it's better to talk offline. But my recollection is that they did not want to pursue the Burton Station. So there's no point in doing public engagement if that's not the right site for them.
I hope we'll do it immediately, so that there's not, I mean, I don't think this is something that should be set aside. I think these people need a chance to make their concerns known immediately, like next week. Be glad to set it up.
Okay, John.
But to pick up on Linwood's view, which was a good one, because a requirement is a requirement. You get back to the place I said, only way you're going to be moving on this requirement, if these public, is you're back bringing money to the table. So I know in parallel, we can be looking, as to sites that weren't available within the threshold that we thought. But if threshold isn't the issue and the requirement is, at least you can tell the public, we went and looked in parallel, but it's not a requirement that we have the physical capacity to exercise. And so we just get to a point where we just take the risk of the servicing population so we can find a better answer. I'm not saying that's what we want to get to, but I think we could do that in parallel so we're not losing time. So it gets to your point, is what's the backup plan? Because the requirement didn't go away just because that site failed.
Right.
That's possible.
I would go along with that.
Possible, Mr.
If I can make a recommendation.
So you can tell me later.
I think one of the things to do, once again, we do have a situation where we're running out of land. And I think immediate public engagement will probably be the most prudent course for us to do to take the temperature. And, just speaking, being the Centerville rep for a long time, it's a very population dense area. And I remember a number of years ago, they wanted to build a place, I believe it was called the Hillhaven House, which is a 4-story, over 65 place right on Windhaven Parkway. And it was right smack at the beginning of Brigadoon. And it sits right next to Stumpy Lake. And, there was some pushback on it. But that being said, it turned out to serve a need. That we have a growing, aging population here. But, but the point is though, as we do run out of, land, we're gonna have to improvise, adapt and overcome going forward. But, does anybody object at this forward? Let's just go ahead and push forward with the civic engagement on it.
Well, I would really like to set up a meeting with some of the folks from NAMI, with some of the folks from Christopher Farms, and they can begin this discussion immediately.
Yeah, I think is that the prudent course at this point?
Yes.
Okay.
But also to continue to pursue alternative sites in the event that we have problems with this one, I don't want to have to start all over again. I'd like to keep
Commercial
Okay.
looking.
okay?
Okay? Understood?
Yes, thank you.
All righty.
There's your eight.
Okay, city manager's briefing.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, at this time, David Jarman from the Department of Public Works is going to brief council on the roadway CIP. We're going to explain a couple where we are in terms of status on some projects and also some updates as it relates to the CIP from a financing standpoint.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, City Manager. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I know this presentation has been bumped a couple times and a couple conflicts with council, and I had a couple conflicts too, so I'm excited to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to get in front of you today and talk about our transportation roadway updates here. This is going to be a brief presentation. Should be a good one too. I think we've got good news to report. We're not doing a comprehensive look at our program. We're really just looking at some focused things, some recently completed projects that are currently in construction, and a 12-month forecast of the projects coming up in the next year or so. And we'll talk about a few challenges at the end. So we'll jump right into our recently completed projects. Now, let me just back up and say, because this was bumped a couple times, recent was a while back. So consider April to be recent if you would for right now. So, but anyways, all still good projects and definitely want to get these in front of you. So first project we got is Nemo Parkway Phase 2A. This was the roundabout there at Nemo and West Neck. Again, this was the kind of the grand entrance there to the Vet Care Center. The project included, you could see the finished product there. We got a nice aerial photo there with the sidewalks, the multi-use path, and the traffic markings there. The project was completed in March of 2022, and a total cost there right at $3 million. And you can see the Vet Care entrance there in the back. That was as of April, I believe. And if there's any questions, just stop, or any comments, feel free to stop and interrupt me there. Next project is the rehab of the Punga Ferry Bridge. This was just a rehab. Punga Ferry is not as young as it used to be, the bridge. And so there was some repairs that needed to be done, the concrete deck, epoxy overlay. There was a lot of work done under the bridge with some beam repairs and some bearing replacements that had to be done that went on for several months. But the project was completed in March, and it was a total cost of about $3.9 million. And you can see some of the pictures here with the epoxy overlay in the middle and the deck repairs that were done there with the rebar exposed and just cleaning those up a little bit. Oops. They were working under the bridge. They had some crews under the bridge doing some of the beam repairs. So it's just safety netting for the work that's going on under the bridge. Next project was the Lake Edwards parking lot. This is actually a really good project. This was a kind of a multiple outcome project, not a terribly expensive project, but just an area where there was some parking issues. Some of the community leaders had brought this forward to the city, and we looked at that and said there's a lot of things we could do. Housing and neighborhood preservation was involved. Public Works Stormwater Regulatory was involved. It came to us in engineering, and we got the design done, and our operations staff got it built. So it really was a lot of players involved in this and really had a good outcome. The goal there was to kind of clean up. You can see the bottom right, where it was just kind of random parking. We took that area, formalized it, put some ponds in there to help with stormwater quality, and also got some more formalized parking there for the residents. So it really was kind of a win-win for everybody. And again, just a small project, $235,000. Our next project there, Independence Boulevard Sidewalk. If you remember what this project looked like before, it was a well-worn path next to Independence Boulevard. And now what you see there today is a 5-foot wide sidewalk that allows safe pedestrian travel from the west side of Independence Boulevard there from Baxter Road, distance of about a little less than a half a mile. So this one, we got a lot of compliments on that. I think Mr. Moss from the Active Transportation meeting yesterday, a lot of good comments on that. which is great to hear. It's great to hear when the public has the feedback there. But this project was completed in April. Total cost was about $1.6 million. And we had about a little less than $800,000 of TAP funding. That's federal grant funding in that project. So a really good one for us and for the city there. Next project, the Pacific Avenue corridor improvements. These were just some safety improvements from 10th Street to 40th Street. A lot of the major work, the median and curb work was confined to 33rd Street to 38th. But the idea here was that we would establish the median refuge. So if somebody's trying to cross Pacific Avenue, they don't have to cross 4 or 5 lanes of traffic. They can just cross 2, stop for a minute, kind of get their bearings, and cross 2 more lanes. So this is a really good safety improvement project. We also added some signage and some other crosswalks, things like that in the area as well. That was completed in May. Total cost of $1 million, and a little less than half of that was HSIP safety funding. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question on that. So during that construction phase, I got a lot of calls about potholes and things like that. Has all that been resolved? You know?
As far as I know, it has. I can maybe get with you on that and check and see if there was any other complaints on that. But we can look into that.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah, Guy?
Yes, sir.
Another one here. There we go. I just wanted to make a comment for the public's sake. I've heard multiple people, and I understand why, saying, that's great what you've done up between 33rd and 36th. Why don't you do it down farther south where we've had some traffic accidents and problems? And that certainly, we have that goal in mind on a long-term basis, but the biggest problem is the right-of-way is not as wide downtown, so to speak, as it is out there. So just so if anybody's watching, you wonder why we focused on that area. Number one, we got a grant, I think, to do some of it. Number two, there are significant right-of-way acquisition issues that we're going to have to face at some time to improve Pacific Avenue, which I completely think we should and must and need to, but that's one reason why we could do this project without acquiring additional right-of-way, whereas to do the same kind of project with the median and the safety area in the south side presents a lot more problems.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay. All right. Next project. This was a safety improvement project, again, with HSIP funding there. This is called the high visibility backplate replacement. You can see, you've probably seen it around town where we put the yellow reflective stripe around the signals. The idea is to kind of draw that to the driver's attention and hopefully help them better see the signals and what they need to do as far as their response. So this project was completed in August. It was in various locations around the city. You've probably seen it if you've been anywhere driving. The total cost is about $725,000, and the majority of that was paid with HSIP funding. So that was a good project for us as well. The backplate, it's this yellow stripe around there. That's the piece that goes on there. Just connects on the back of the signal.
I get the point of it. I just wanted for everybody to see.
Right.
I don't think not everybody knows what a backplate.
Right, and I don't have a close-up picture. Maybe next time I'll put a more detailed picture. Sorry about that. All right, our next section we want to move into is projects in construction. This is orange barrels and signs up. Our first project is Princess Anne Road Phase 7, Miss Henley's favorite project, I think, at least for right now. But the project is completed, so I'm happy to say that we're done. That's probably the best news to report. We are doing some closeout and some final cleanup. The contractor's doing punch list and working on just some miscellaneous items there. So for those who may not know, it was a 4-lane divided roadway from General Booth to Fisher Arch. And we've completed all the major items on that. And you can see this was some of the last remaining items with the turn lane there at General Booth, the dual lefts that's now open. We've heard a lot of good comments on that as well. That project was $38.6 million, and a little less than half was in revenue share funding.
Barbara?
I think the holdup for so much of it was in just getting the materials, that whole thing with the problems and getting parts. That turn lane was held up because of a seal or something that the natural gas people needed to be able to close that road up. It's unreal what this road project went through.
It was. It's frustrating to report. It was probably a $10 part was holding the whole thing up, and so it's embarrassing and it's hard to report. But that's where we were, months ago. We kind of all lived through that. So you're absolutely right, Ms. Henley. Any other questions? All right, we'll move forward here. The next project we're reporting that's in construction is Providence Road sidewalk. This is it's a sidewalk project from Providence from Kempsville to Indian Lakes, Churchill intersection. So. Project's moving along. We did have a utility conflict with a storm pipe. The utility line was installed in the wrong location. So we're working with the contractor. He's been working pretty well with us to kind of get through that. He's found some other areas where he can work and keep moving. So we're not as far along construction right now. We're about 30% complete. And our completion date now is probably pushed out to spring of 2023. So we're working through that now. Total cost on that is a little less than $1 million with about $638 from TAP funding. All right, next project is Indian River Road, Providence Road intersection improvements. This project provides a lot of signal, sidewalk, and pedestrian improvements. One of the major upgrades here is, if you're familiar with the trap lane out there on Indian River Road, this is going to remove the trap lane that's there right now. We're basically completed with all the concrete and signal work. We have to get the paving done, and we've had some delays with getting signal cabinets. One theme we've kind of seen in this is anything that's steel or metal is prone to having some delays. And these cabinets, I was just talking with a subcontractor yesterday, they have about a 28 to 30 week lead time. So our schedule right now has this thing coming in at the end of the year. So we'll get everything done. We're still going to be a little bit delayed getting those cabinets in. If we get them in sooner, great, but that's what he's telling us right now. So total cost on that's a little over $3 million. And with the paving and the remaining work, it's about 60% complete with completion at the end of the year. Next project is Alaskan Road Bridge and Alaskan Road Phase 1A. This is the VDOT managed project, the 8 lanes on Alaskan Road. This extends from Republic to Red Robin Road. Total cost on this project is a little less than $142 million. And right now, VDOT's about 50% complete. We know that there's been some cost increases. They've had to go back to CTB for some additional funds. One of the things I think, Councilmember Ranch, you mentioned about the multi-use path or shared use path extension, that is in the request that they just made. So as far as we've been told, that will be extended to Cardinal Drive, sorry. So we'll have a logical completion there. So right now, VDOT's saying that they're still reporting spring of 23, but we know the completion date is going to be at least a year right now, 2024. And in VDOT's defense, they've run into about everything you could. They've had material delays. They've also run into some underground contaminated material that they've had to start pumping, a lot of contaminated water pumping. That's taken a lot of money and a lot of time. And of course, getting out of the ground with utilities up there, as they'll tell you, it's almost a utility project with a minor road project in between. So,
I think it may be time, and I know this is VDOT's project, but I think it may be time for some kind of public outreach, whether it's through the media or otherwise, to really explain where we are with this project. As this 23 spring date's coming up, there's no reason to wait. If we think it's going to be longer, we need to go on and let the public know that, and let them know fully if there have been some not just supply chain issues, but some other site issues that I'm not sure people know about. I think they're entitled to know about it. I think they want to know about it. And I would just suggest we do some outreach to let people know where this project is, what its current status is. Not to extinguish any criticism of it. People are certainly entitled to criticize it, but simply just because the project has been now ongoing for long enough that it's due for an update in terms of broad information. I think there are a lot of people who would like to know what the current take is.
Thank you.
sure, appreciate that. And we'll talk to VDOT about that. That's a good suggestion. We'll work with them on that. All right, our next project we have up here is First Colonial Virginia Beach Boulevard. This is more of a standard intersection improvement project. If you think back to Princess Anne, Kempsville without the relocation, that would kind of be what this project is, more dual lefts, right turn lanes to help traffic flow in this area. If you've been there, you can see how anything like that will really make an improvement there. One of the reasons I included this picture right here on the left, the stockpile water and sewer, this isn't something you see early in a project these days. Our contractor was able to work with the supplier. He had a good relationship with the supplier and was able to secure some of the water line and sewer line material early in the project. So that's good news. That's that schedule right there, when you look at that picture, that's what the project manager will see is schedule. So total cost on this is $34 million. And they started in June of 22. So the project's about 3.5 years. It's a long timeline, but one thing to remember is we've got a lot of restrictions on daytime traffic impacts. So a lot of this work's going to happen at night. So imagine putting 50 feet of that in a night, burying it, having to come back and dig it up and continue working on it tomorrow night. So it's going to be a little bit of time spent on that. So yes, ma'am.
Are any of these construction projects the beneficiary of the infrastructure project passed by the President Biden?
We haven't seen the money yet. We are, in fact, we were just talking about it this morning. Some of that money's starting to trickle in the program, but it's taken a while, I think, because they've kind of had to figure out how they were going to get in the programs and get it allocated. So it's coming, it's just not there yet. Any other questions? Okay. We'll walk forward. Next project is Sandbridge Road, Nimitz Parkway, Phase 7A. This is the piece from Sandpiper Road heading west about 1.1 miles. Again, this is one of our first projects where we're raising the road to accommodate sea level rise. So we got 100-year flood elevation plus 3 foot of sea level rise to provide some resiliency in this section. Again, we're going to have paved shoulders, really good geometric improvements, and some adaptive LED street lights. It's a little different than what we normally do, where the lights tend to dim, and then the sensors allow them to come on as vehicles come through with some energy saving measures there. So the project has started. The total cost is about $24.5 million on that. Ms. Henry, yep.
Barbara?
This project is probably going to be one of those that takes a long time. This raising to accommodate the 3 foot sea level rise is going to require some surcharging of that land, and that's going to mean that it sits for a while and then work goes on. So folks really need to know what's going on with this project so they don't think that nobody's doing anything during that time when actually something very important is happening.
Sure, and that's a good point too. And it may, we don't know yet. I mean, just seeing the excavator here in the swamp, I mean, you can see what we're dealing with out there just for clearing. So hopefully it's going to get better, and we may have to surcharge to let some of the material settle. We'll know more once we get into it, but you're absolutely right. Yes, sir.
I don't know if you can environmentally do it, but are you looking at polymer injection into the soil to make it more weight bearing?
We haven't looked at that for this particular project. What we typically do in this case is they're looking at a geogrid type material, which is basically just a plastic mesh, heavy duty plastic mesh, and they'll put that down. There is some good material down there. You just have to get through the slop to get to it. But in some cases, they'll try to bridge it with this geotextile or geogrid, and then put select fill on top of that. So it's probably a little more standard, a little cheaper than the injection you're talking about.
That's a long time road, sometimes penny wise, pound foolish.
Understood. All right. Next project, that's just the last project in the construction section here, is West Neck Road Phase 4. This has been a long time coming as well. This is 2-lane improvements there from Kellum High School south to the Fountain property, which is just in the bottom picture, just in the curve where the woods are down there. The project's going to include a standard 2-lane road, but it's going to have shoulders and more of a standard ditch section, so for safety improvements down there. It's also going to have 2 10-foot shared use paths from Kellum High School south to the signature entrance right here. And then, that's the pump station signature. And then south of that, there'll be one 10-foot shared use path that extends all the way down to Indian River Road. So there'll be a good facility down there when we get done for recreation. This is also a cost participation with the developer of the Kingston Estates. The construction right now is about 25% complete, and the total cost there is about $9.5 million, and they started in May of this year.
Dave, I was going to ask you, you mentioned a shared use path. Is our policy when we do roadworks that we have bike paths adjacent to them, or do we have any kind of policy like that?
We do. We have, with the bike and trail, or the active transportation, we have on-road facilities and off-road facilities. And in the perfect world, we put everything in there that we can. In the real world of budgets and right-of-way and utilities, we kind of work with the stakeholders to say, what can we do? What, is there a best fit here? Can we do one thing and not the other? Can we maybe give you a wide outside lane instead of a bike lane and do the shared use path? So there's a variety of options that we have to try to make that work. Okay. All right, moving along here, we'll move to our forecast here, upcoming projects. One of the biggest projects we have coming up is Elbow Phase 2B and 2C. And the reason there's two phases on that is it was an incredibly expensive project, so we took it apart so we could be better poised to get smart scale funding. So we did, and now the schedules are back together, and we're going to put it back together for construction. So I think that will work better from an economical standpoint. This is about 1.3 miles of a 4-lane divided roadway. And again, this is the project that's going to take the elbow out of Elbow Road. So we're going to have 2 new bridges out there, 1,000-foot-long bridges. So you're not going to be running off the road or having the road flood at that point. It is going to have an 8-foot sidewalk, on-road bike lanes, so those amenities will be included. And the total cost there is $76.2 million with $50 million in state and federal funding. And we're on track right now for an April notice to proceed.
Aaron, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You said they're going to have bike lanes on there?
Yes, sir, on both sides.
On both sides, and that's going to be extended all the way down to Sunplay. I rode that trail for on my bike, and it's really dangerous. So
You rode that on Elbow Road?
Yeah. So
Wow, okay.
What you do, though, is before you get to Indian River, you have to walk and make sure you have about a 5-minute window before you decide to go down Elbow.
Yes, you do. Well, and to add to that, too, this is the first section here for Elbow Road. We've got another phase of Elbow Road heading back towards the amphitheater. We also have in this area right here, Indian River Phase 7A and B. So that will kind of complete the loop, say, from Lynn Haven coming back around. So
And there'll be integrated bike lanes that go all the way around with that?
yes, sir. So we'll have much more of a corridor there for you and for others.
And for others, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
May be a good idea to avoid for a while.
Yeah, you're right.
Barbara?
This is supposed to get underway the first part of next year. Are we planning to have a community meeting to let folks know about this coming? Because this is going to be one of those really big changes to the road system and everything in there so that folks can know what's coming. I think when we had the last meeting, I guess it's been 4 years ago now, public on the Indian River Road and this one, the comment from some of the people was that we didn't think this was ever going to happen, so we'd just not been planning on it.
Right.
So just to let them know that it is going to happen, and I think combining the 2 phases into one is smart, but it's going to be a big project, and it's with those bridges in there, it's going to be some major impacts, just so folks can know what's
Right.
coming.
It will. We'll look at that, Ms. Henley. That's not a bad idea given the timeline. A lot of this is going to be built off, I say off alignment. It's going to be off alignment from existing elbow. Some will be on elbow. A lot will be off alignment. So the impacts to the public will be, they'll still be there, but they'll be diminished. But we'll go back and take a look at that because you're right. That might be a good opportunity to engage the public and just let them know what's coming.
Hey, John?
Are you using precast stuff to do the bridges?
The bridge, they'll use precast girders for sure. The deck, I believe, is cast in place. And that's just, I mean, obviously there's a lot more detail in deck pours and getting elevations right. So it's easier to do something like that. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, next project. This is a smaller project. This is Independence Boulevard, Columbus Street pedestrian improvements. We've got dual lefts right now in Independence heading on to Columbus. So the game plan here is to remove one of the dual lefts and turn that into a median refuge. So again, you don't have to cross 8 lanes of or 6 lanes of traffic out there. And traffic has looked at that, analyzed that, modeled it to make sure we're not causing problems. And yes, the single left lane is adequate for that intersection there. So should be a good pedestrian upgrade. Total cost on that's $500,000, and we've got $352,000 TAP funding. And that's scheduled to start next year, next late summer. We're early. We're ahead of schedule on that. We're trying to keep that schedule for right now.
Hey, John?
This is a dangerous place to cross, not only because of people, that light, trying to beat that light. So are we looking at I know they have embedded lighting now to go with crosswalks in the roadway that brights when it's time for the pedestrians to cross to remind people are trying to run the red light to get through the intersection.
Sure.
Are we looking at those kind of, at that, only because the intensity of movement there? Are we looking for some kind of enhanced pedestrian? Because now we're trying to encourage more people to walk that way.
Right.
And that traffic that moves in there is, I know all of us probably
Correct.
drive that. That's a tough place to navigate. It's a tactical assessment's needed.
Yeah, we'll definitely look at that with traffic engineering and see if there's any other signage or anything else we need to do when that opens. That's a good point too.
All right, thank
Absolutely.
you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Got it.
All right. Next project is the HRT bus shelters. This is just the next phase. This is an ongoing program that council's funded. This is the next phase 5 and 7. And again, these are good quick hitter projects, and it's kind of a multiple outcome. The way this works is Public Works Engineering does the design, Public Operations goes out and puts the pad in and does the sidewalk, any curb ramp improvements, and then HRT comes in and sets the shelter. So it just provides, a good respite area for somebody if they're waiting and the weather's bad. So the next phases are coming up. We look to start those the first of the year, and the total cost there is around $140,000. And that's an ongoing program.
Right. Aaron, we're completing, I believe it's 12 of those, correct? On rescheduled to do 12 those bus stations around.
There's different, I'm thinking phases, which there's some different pieces in the phases. So to tell you exactly how, I'd have to go back and look at all those.
Okay.
Yeah, there are many more phases. I think there's like 9 or 10 phases I got right now. Okay.
Thank you.
Next project is Potter's Road Diet. This is on Potter's Road from Lynn Haven to London Bridge. This essentially is a 5-lane section, and or 4-lane section, and we're going to take that to 2 through lanes, 1 center turn lane, and 2 full bike lanes on either side of the road. So with the traffic on that road, this is a good candidate for road diet. And you can see we've got the $856,000. We got $570 in grant funding for that. So they like those projects too for grant projects. We bid that. That's getting the contracts getting awarded, and we're looking to start that in the first part of the year. Our next project is Salem Road Sidewalk Phase 1. This is just a small sidewalk project. Again, 5-foot sidewalk from Rock Lake Loop to Salem Lakes Boulevard. This kind of completes the connection between those two areas. Again, curb and shoulder improvements, $840,000 project with TAP funding, about $334,000 of TAP funding. Looking to start that one after the first of the year as well. Yes, sir.
Aaron, if you go up from Salem up to Dam Neck on the back side, it needs a sidewalk as well.
Mm-hmm.
Did we not look at how far it goes down there?
We have, and like a lot of these, we have to eat the elephant one bite at a time. So we do have a group that looks at those and kind of assesses priorities about where, because if we took care of all the needs, we would need a lot more money in our TSI program.
Sure, but I was mentioning that because off the Salem Road where it connects to Dam Neck,
right?
It's just right off of Elbow Road when you come up Elbow Road,
right?
And there's a two-lane street, and there's no sidewalk or any road on that edge. And so since we're already looking at on this street, I was wondering how far did it go down?
Let me look. Let me check on that and look, because there may also be another project. We also have other projects sometimes that are backlogged, so I can look and see if that's on the list or not.
All right, thank you.
Okay. All right, and finally, last project in the construction section here. This is a state of good repair. This is really our resurfacing project here. We've got two contracts right now. One was from FY21 and FY22. Both of these are slated to start here in the spring, and the total cost for both of them is around $5 million. Sorry. So both of these are going to go. You can see the roads. I'm not going to read all the street names there, but again, these are good projects here. Get the roads sealed up and restriped. We also deal with some of the curb ramp issues where there's been curb ramp repairs, things like that. So, questions on that? All right. Just wanted to highlight just real quick, just touch on some challenges. Prices, costs have been there. I know council's probably heard that quite a bit. We're still dealing with that as well on the back end here, trying to get these projects delivered. Again, just to reiterate, the market, there's a lot of bandwidth that's being sucked up with all these projects between the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. VDOT alone is really consuming a lot of bandwidth with resources. So we're still kind of dealing with that. One of the things that we're adding into our contracts, just wanted to highlight for council, at least on transportation projects, we're putting in some escalation clauses, escalation provisions for fuel, steel, and asphalt. And what this does is it ties those sometimes volatile materials to an index. And so from that index, we can help contractors have more normalized bids. Otherwise, contractors have to guess what's fuel price going to be in 6 months or a year or 3 years from now, and that would be virtually impossible to guess today. So VDOT does it on all their projects. We haven't done in the past because our prices haven't done this, but as prices have gotten much more volatile, these things have allowed us to kind of dial in, and contractors focus on getting us the best price, and then we'll deal with escalations and reductions as they come up down the road. So we feel like that's going to help us get better bids and better consistency in our pricing. So.
Okay, John, then Aaron.
in light of that, it would seem like it would make more sense rather than trying to build in contingencies in every project based on cost index, is to have a CIP project itself, which is the fund that deals with that kind of escalation, because the projects are phased on different time periods. But if you're tying it to an index, it may be better to manage change of requirements through contingencies, but not try to do by project cost index, but instead have a central account by which you meet all your escalations for cost index.
It could be. Sometimes when we do our contingency, I mean, it's kind of more project specific. So if we're doing a dirt job, for example, NEMO 7A, our contingency, usually we'll budget, say, around 10%. Our contingency on something like that may be more like 12 to 13%, just because we know, sometimes you're just unknown unknowns out there. So, but I mean, obviously not a bad idea. It's one way to kind of skin that cat for sure.
It's something to look at, something I've done before, because it's dealing not with changing requirement, it's dealing with an index. If you have an index, and having a central account can be a good way of managing that. I'm not saying it's the right answer, just an answer to look at.
It was Aaron and then Barbara.
Thank you, sir. Right, Mrs. Button. I think it's something else we also can look at is being that the HRT and VDOT, HRT expansion and VDOT are taking up a lot of resources. We are looking at reaching out, we're thinking outside the box, so we're trying to reach out to other smaller companies who can do the work of sidewalks and some of the other smaller projects where they can become GCs on this SWAM businesses that are DBE as well, and typically would be a subcontractor on the larger projects that we are thinking outside the box and providing these opportunities for other small and SWAM businesses and DBE businesses to get involved and take advantage of the work that's out there that we're having a hard time fulfilling or going through the normal channels, which we usually, in the bid process, where we usually filter these bids out, that we are finding ways to communicate and trying to give these other small businesses an opportunity to bid on some of these projects.
Yes, sir.
We're utilizing that. I know that's something that would go tremendously far, not only within our city, but from speaking as the liaison for the Minority Business Council as well. There are a lot of companies out there, small businesses and SWAM companies out there that don't even go to approach these bids because they won't even think they will have a shot. And so I think if we can find a way to utilize them as well and that potential there may be some help to kind of move these projects along by using their services.
Sure, understood.
Thank you.
Hey, Barbara.
I know it's probably not what you want to hear, but I want to talk about a project that needs to be in this list that's not. So as far as adding new lists, I think if you're starting your plans for the next year CIP, you need to hear this now. And this is not news to Public Works, but I've been very much concerned for quite some time now about that eastern end of Indian River Road, essentially from the West Neck Creek into Pungo, because that section is dangerous. It goes through the swamp. It has no shoulder that would hold anything up if you get off the pavement. And in some places, particularly on the southern side where people have gone off, I mean, it's concrete and then water. And I know that I've asked for some kinds of barriers and so forth, but they're not possible to put there because there's nothing to attach them to. It's dangerous and somebody is going to die. And I'm worried about it. And everybody's had a couple of years to try to figure this out without a project, and nobody's been able to come up with anything. So I think we're going to have to start looking at it. I know it's going to be an extremely costly project. I know it's going to be difficult to permit. Well, I guess it's not going through a new swamp. It's repairing an existing very hazardous situation. So maybe it's not an impossibility to permit, but something's got to be done. And if we could at least just put something in to start the design so we can see, I'm sure it's going to have to be elevated, It's going to be a lot like the NEMO 5. We were talking about that, I think, a little bit ago, the way that was elevated. But that is dangerous. And there are people like me who won't drive that. I won't drive it after dark. And I've heard so many people tell me that they just won't go down that section anymore because it's so dangerous. So if we could at least start looking at it.
Yes, ma'am. We'll take a look at it, and you hit the nail on the head. It's cost and permitting, utilities. If we put we're not going to put back what's there. It's going to have to be a standard road section, so the shoulders are going to be wider, and it's going to be a pretty extensive project. But we can definitely go back and take a look at that, take that message back, and see what we can do.
Thank you.
Alcino?
Anything in the queue to make Northampton Boulevard between 64 and Bayside Road a lot more pedestrian friendly?
We're working on some improvements out there right now. I know at Northampton and Baker, I believe we've got some improvements that are in design right now. And
you've had quite a few fatalities there.
Yes,
with
ma'am.
Pedestrians.
And we're on that right now. That one's morphing a little bit more with like a lot of times utilities and some stormwater issues there. But we're definitely working on that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Quick question, where do we stand on widening Centerville Turnpike?
Centerville Turnpike, phase 2 or phase 3? Preference? Both. Okay. Centerville 2 right now, the construction timeline for that is to start in 25. I believe that was January of 25, not mistaken. And then Centerville 3 is in 27. So Centerville 2 right now is in right-of-way. We're in the right-of-way phase, so we got to get through right-of-way. We got to move utilities, and then we can get out there. So there's still a lot of work. Yes, sir.
Thanks a bunch. Okay.
Thank you.
When you were, I'm sorry, can I ask you about paving?
Yes, ma'am.
When you were talking about paving projects, it may be included, I'm not sure, but the section down past Indian River Road, Level Green, in that area past, it's past Level Green, I believe.
Okay.
But that's Indian River Road that keeps going out towards Military Highway.
Correct.
That section there is pretty rough, and it's been rough for a long time. Is that on the list?
I don't see it on the list, but we can get back with operations because it may not be on this year's list, but it might be on an upcoming year. So we can get with them and check to see.
Please look
Okay.
into that. That's been like that for a long time.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
John?
We're still doing the vehicle that goes through and does the digital mapping of the highways and still grading them the same, correct?
For the pavement indice, you mean?
Right, looks like for the alligator cracks versus the
Yes.
other kind of cracks.
Yes, sir. That's still ongoing. Yes.
It's actually ongoing right now. So the van is running around right now. And to your question, Councilmember Wooten, the way that we prioritize roads is based upon that pavement condition index. So the van goes through, it runs every lane mile in the city, and it measures crack width, tire deflection, and all the other elements that go along with it. It comes back with the score. Based upon that score, that's how we prioritize what the next section of pavement is. There's some deviations, of course. You know, if we have two roads that score exactly the same, and one of them's a neighborhood road and the other one's Virginia Beach Boulevard, we're going to prioritize Virginia Beach Boulevard because of the amount of traffic that it carries. Additionally, some of the funding mechanisms that Dave was talking about, they carry federal funding with them, and they will only allow us. So one of the projects that was identified was the overlay project. What's it called? State of Good Repair Overlay Project. That can only be done on certain classifications of roads. So there are a couple of exceptions, but that's how roadway projects and mill and overlay is prioritized.
Well, thank you for that, because I know I get a lot of questions from people, and I try to tell neighborhoods when I go that we have a very objective, apolitical process for prioritizing repaving, and it's based upon that science database evaluation. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Hey, appreciate all the presentations today. At this point, any council discussions? Oh, one more. Oh my God, the cannabis. We'll call that a Freudian slip.
All right, so Mayor, at this time, Deborah Bryan, our Legislative Affairs Director, is going to brief council on cannabis next steps, including having the state authority on cannabis come in to brief council and also the public on the state of cannabis in the Commonwealth.
Deborah, my sincere apologies for my almost error of omission.
No problem, Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of City Council. When I was last before you, several of you expressed in the interim interest in establishing a cannabis advisory task force. And there was also a little bit of confusion regarding what the legislation currently is regarding cannabis. So for that reason, I wanted to provide you with a very quick status update of legislation, where it stands, and what we anticipate for the 2023 session. To briefly orient you to where the cannabis market is at in Virginia, the medical use prescription cannabis has been legal for some time now, as you know. The first medical cannabis dispensary opened in October of 2020. Oops, sorry, wrong one. In 2021, we had a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate. The General Assembly and the governor passed legislation that legalized the possession of up to an ounce of cannabis, and also an organization called the Cannabis Control Authority was created. Many parts of the bill needed to be reenacted in 2022 in order to authorize retail sales for recreational use by the target date of 2024. The decision to wait until 2024 was made at that time for retail sales because it was initially intended that the lawmakers and regulators would have a 3-year runway to set up the market. However, before the Democrats finalized the plan, they lost control of the House and the governor's office in 2022, and that put the state into a gray area with regard to cannabis regulation. So you'll see then in 2022, we had a flip in the House, and we had a Democratic Senate and a Republican House, and the legislation that was aimed at creating the retail sales framework was defeated. There was an additional criminal penalty that was created for certain possessions of cannabis, and then there was some budget language that was adopted that prohibited the sale of certain THC hemp products. There was also some additional money that was included in last year's budget for enforcement in education. So that brings us up to our next upcoming General Assembly session, which would be in 2023. And for this upcoming session, as you know, the makeup of legislators is the same. So we still have a split where we have a majority in the Senate of Democrats and a majority in the House of Republicans. So that is part of why we just do not know what is going to happen next year. The Cannabis Control Act passed during the 2021 special session, and that created the Cannabis Control Authority. We included a brief in your packet this past Friday that had some information about the Cannabis Control Authority, and that is the authority that's currently working on developing the framework for cannabis regulation in Virginia. The Cannabis Control Authority consists of a board of directors, which are 5 citizens that are appointed at large by the governor. There is to be a chief executive officer, but the governor has not yet chosen that person. On the screen here is Jeremy Priest, and Jeremy has been the acting head of the CCA since the spring. He's also the chief officer of regulatory policy and external affairs. As I mentioned in the brief in your Friday package, Mr. Priest has agreed to come and address you on November 1st to give further information about the Cannabis Control Authority and to answer any of your questions. The Cannabis Control Authority is also going to be made up of staff. They anticipate that they will have about 7 employees initially. They do have a chief administrative officer that will be starting soon, and then they plan to hire about 36 employees in FY23. They haven't yet started working on regulations for the state's recreational market because the legislature in 2022 did not reenact the provisions creating the retail market. So there's no need right now for those regulations, and they're also waiting to see what the 2023 General Assembly will bring. So in the meantime, and of course, I don't want to take away any of Mr. Priest's thunder. He'll be addressing you, as said, on November 1st. But what the agency has been working on is public outreach strategies, safety programs, and also assuming its role as regulator of the state's medical cannabis program. So as I mentioned, that is legal right now, medical cannabis, and that is controlled under the Virginia Board of Pharmacy. However, one of the gray areas, as I mentioned previously, is that part of the 2021 legislation that did not need reenactment charged the Cannabis Control Authority to eventually assume the regulatory oversight of the medical cannabis program. So that's what they are in the process of doing. Besides staffing, they're also taking over that program. Columbia Care controls 2 of the state's 4 licenses to process marijuana for medical use, G-Leaf in Richmond area and Cannabis in Hampton Roads. And that's the one medical pharmacy or medical marijuana dispensary that we have here in Virginia on Bird Neck Road. Under the 2021 legislation, there was also a Public Health Advisory Council that was authorized. And the Public Health Advisory Council also is active, like the Cannabis Control Authority, and they do meet regularly. Their role is to provide advice to the Cannabis Control Authority Board. This council is made up of 21 members, and what they need to, their charge is to monitor public health issues, trends, and impacts that are related to marijuana legislation. So included in your Friday packet this week, I did include the attributes of all 21 members and who gets to appoint them. The Advisory Council last met on September 12th in Richmond. Their next meeting is December 6th. They also have an annual executive summary that's due to the General Assembly January 11th, right before session starts. Since your Friday packet, I do have an update from this morning. A member of this advisory council has also asked if she could be here on November 1st alongside Mr. Priest to address you. Her name is Najisti Abibi, and she is from Richmond, and she currently serves as the Vice President of Public Policy for Columbia Care, but she is also a member of this Public Health Advisory Council. So she'll be here to answer any questions that you have about that part of the CCA. There's also a Cannabis Oversight Commission, and in the 2021 legislation that was authorized in the House and the Senate, this one is made up of totally General Assembly members. There's 6 House members and 4 Senate members. This commission has also been meeting regularly, and they're charged with overseeing the implementation of the original bills, which related to the legalization of simple possession of marijuana. At their last meeting on September 1st, the legislators were given an overview of the legislation to date and then a report on national trends in state-level cannabis policy. They're looking at basically what other states are doing and how they've been regulating it. And they also had an update on the Industrial Hemp Extract Task Force. That is a task force that was in the budget in the 2022 legislation that basically is taking a look at the edibles, anything that has THC in it that is in that part of a gray area that's still legal. So what's next for Virginia? These groups are going to continue to meet in order to fulfill their charge. As I mentioned, the CCA board met last week on October 6th. I looked at their all of what they did this morning, and their minutes were basically they just received updates on what was going on as you're getting here today. Their next meeting is on December 12th. Again, Mr. Priest will be here on November 1st to talk to you and answer any questions. Later in November, they plan to hold a community town hall in our area for the public to come to, and we will publicize that so that the public and any business owners can come to that and speak to them and answer any questions. The task force last met on October 9th. They have one more meeting this fall, and then they have to submit a report to the General Assembly on November 15th. So the good news for any task force that you all form will have lots of reports to give them and information to give them. And the Cannabis Public Health Advisory Council last met on September 12th. Their next meeting is the 6th. And as I noted, there will be one of their members, Najiste Abibi, who's going to be here to talk to you on the 1st and answer any questions. Also, Columbia Care, who is the authorized medical dispensary for our area, has offered tours of their facility to any city council members or department directors, however you all see fit that would benefit from such a tour. And the Advisory Council's annual report is due, as I mentioned, on January 11th. So the big question, what are the chances that something will get passed during the 2023 General Assembly session? Well, There are signs that some key Republicans are taking an interest in the issue, with lawmakers representing agricultural areas taking the lead. We do know that the illicit market has moved from the shadows onto things like social media, and there's been advertising of that market. So those that are working on the issue have told us that the booming illicit and gray market is the number one case for getting everyone in the General Assembly on board with legalizing retail sales. So the bottom line is we may see some clarifications to cultivation and regulations on personal use, and some interim steps in furtherance of retail sales and regulations. But overall, it's anyone's guess. Any questions?
So everything's definitely tentative.
Everything is done, yes.
All right,
That is
Guy,
correct.
and then Barbara.
Thank you, David. I understand you say the town hall, which is kind of uncertain as to when that's going to happen.
That will be sometime, they're looking right now to do that sometime around Thanksgiving.
Thanks. Barbara? Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, hand up. Sabrina?
Did we have a copy of this information? Was that sent in our packet?
Absolutely. Oh, this, you didn't get this, the pictures and all, but you got a copy of what was a brief.
I saw your briefing. I'm interested in the slide.
I can certainly send you all out a copy of the slides later today, absolutely. Sure, absolutely.
Okay, anyone else? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, any council discussions or comments?
I just have one.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. So last week, we deferred this ordinance for the amphitheater roof. And we were going to look at the ARPA fund versus TIP fund issue. And in speaking with the city manager, he's looking at repurposing ARPA funds, but that's going to take some time, and the roof is a pressing issue. So next week, I'd like to sponsor this ordinance along with Councilmember Moss to use TIP funds for the amphitheater roof so we can get going on that. So that'll be on the agenda next week, if that's all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, good. Anybody else at this point? All right, at this point, why don't you go ahead and get through it? Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to recess into a closed session pursuant to the exemptions from the open meeting followed by section 2.23711A Code of Virginia is amended for the following purposes. Discussion, considerations, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining or resignation, public officers, appointees, employees, and public body pursuant to section 2.2, and that's for appointments, council boards, commissions, committees, authorities, agencies, and appointees. Do I have a motion? Okay.
Councilmember Berlucci? Aye. Councilmember Branch?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley? Aye. Councilmember Holcomb?
Aye.
Councilmember Miles?
Aye.
Councilmember Moss? Councilmember Rouse?
Aye.
Councilmember Tower?
Aye.
Councilmember Wooten?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wilson?
Aye.
Mayor Dyer?
Aye.
By a vote of.
Terry, aye.
Thank you. By a vote of 11-0, you closed into recess and closed session.
Okay. Okay, folks, at this time, we have just a, short thing, so let's go ahead and go into executive.
We're ready to go. Just unmute as you need, okay?
Okay, call us back to order. Do I have a motion to certify the closed session?
So moved.
All right, roll call.
Councilmember Berlucci?
Aye.
Councilmember Branch?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Aye.
Councilmember Holcomb?
Aye.
Councilmember Miles?
Aye.
Councilmember Moss?
Aye.
Councilmember Rouse?
Aye.
Councilmember Tower?
Aye.
Councilmember Wooten?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wilson?
Aye.
Mayor Dyer.
Aye.
By 11 to 0, you certify the closed session.
We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.